our artifacts from the community, preserving our history, and making sure that everybody knows about the people who lived here for generations to come. So thank you for coming. If you feel so inclined, we have a donation box back there, so if you ever feel so inclined, you can put something in there too. But the reason that we're here tonight is to learn about the children's home and learn about the detention center. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sydney Miller. She is our program and event manager. She's going to introduce our guest speakers this evening. So Sydney.
All right, so tonight, a little different format if you've been to our previous speaker series so far. We've got 2 speakers for you, so it might stretch a little longer than we're used to. Our first speaker is going to be Jack Colvin, who served as the director of the detention center until 1997. And then our second speaker is Melissa Meeker, and she was a teacher at the Freer Juvenile Detention Center from 1999 to 2013. So they've got some different perspectives to give you. We're going to have Jack go first, and then you'll have a few minutes to ask him some questions. Melissa will take over. You'll have a few minutes to ask her some questions. Any remaining questions, and then at the end of the night, we will gather anybody who's interested, and we're going to take you downstairs, and you can actually see the downstairs detention center cells, and they can tell you a little bit more information about what some of those rooms outside of the cells were used for, while they were here. You can ask some more questions, but that does require stairs. So obviously that's optional, but keep that in mind. That's going to be our treat at the end of the night. Okay, so with that, Jack, you're up.
You said that bad word speaker. I don't claim to be a speaker. My wife says I'm a storyteller and I have stories about everything. I've worn several different hats since my wife and I came to Ashland in 1967. One of my hats that I wore was I got a job with Judge Michael McKinley, juvenile court judge, and as a probation officer, started as a probation officer and bail for juvenile court. A short time later, the position of the director of the detention center came open, and he appointed me to that. So that's what I did for, I was with juvenile court for 12 years, and so about 10 of them I was the detention director. The detention center, everybody knows this whole building as a children's home, and the detention center part was built into a part of the children's home. Later on, as it was said, there's 4 cells downstairs, there's 3 upstairs, and there's a major difference between the 2. Girls were usually upstairs, boys were downstairs, had to keep them separated, of course. It was built under the direction of the Ohio Department of Youth Services, but that facility is still going today. They still operate detention centers all around the state of Ohio. But in order to, the state would reimburse the county 50% of what it cost to operate the detention center, and it was mainly just for Ashland County youth. In order to maintain getting our funds, we had to have an inspection, annual inspection. The inspector came in and looked through everything. Had to do quarterly reports, and of course there's state laws have you send in reports. And usually when I send in a report, within 2 weeks I got a phone call from Columbus wanting to know the exact numbers I had put on the report. I said, I sent you the reports. Did you ever get them? And he kind of hesitated. He said, well, yeah. I said, what do you do with them? He said, you really want to know? I said, yeah. He said, they're in a box out in the garage. So, that's politics. So anyhow, I had to have 2 staff on duty at all times. If we had girls in, mainly we had many more boys than we did girls, but if we had girls, we had to have a lady there working, which my wife did quite a bit of. And open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Occasionally, the judge would, if we didn't have many in, and depending on what they were in for, if it was a more serious offense, why we stayed open for Christmas, we stayed open for New Year's, Easter, and so forth. But if they were in for a not so serious of offense, he let somebody didn't go in for truancy, which is an unruly, can't lock them up for an unruly, but the judge could put them on probation, and then if they violate their probation, and that can be locked, they can be locked up for violating the probation. And sentencing, the length of time could be anywhere from 1 day, a week, could be up until, basically until they turn 18. Usually if there was a serious offense, they were sent to the Ohio Department of Youth Services, which has facilities all around the state for serious offenders, felony offenders. So that's, and they could stay there until they were 18 or sometimes 21. Sometimes you would put them in for an indefinite time, so they didn't know how long they were going to be here. So we didn't treat them bad, we treated them nicely, but we made them obey our rules, and we made them abide by the rules, or they would lose some of their privileges, which they didn't have any privileges. Daily schedule consisted of, we had court counselors. The court had 2 court counselors, and they would talk with the kids various times during the week. Get them up in the morning, take their showers, clean up have their meals, which meals came from restaurants around, local restaurants. We didn't have any cooking facilities. So we would travel wherever, farthest we ever went was that one. Some were old enough to remember the truck stop out on 71 and 250. And on holidays, when everything was closed in town, we would go out there and get their meals, and whatever was the specials of the day was what they got. And it was always good meals. I guess I never ate them. So the showers, meals, sweeping, mopping the floors, keeping their cells clean. One of the DYS rules was they had to be out of their cell for at least an hour a day for some type of recreation. The room right underneath of this room here in the basement, we used for a rec room. We had a pool table down there, a ping pong table, and the area right out here where the driveway comes through had a chain link fence around it with barbed wire on top, and we had basketball court out there. They could play basketball if they wanted to. A lot of them like to play basketball. I was going with him, and he said, we'll let him out tomorrow. I said, okay. So we let him out. A week later, he got arrested when he on West Main Street for pushing a stolen motorcycle down the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. He ended up, he was one of our frequent flyers. And after I left juvenile court, I went to work for the adult court. And this same 8-year-old that's now in his 20s, I played him down a hallway in cuffs and ankle bracelets, and he got 8 years in prison. I said, you wouldn't listen to us, would you? He said, no, I like my freedom. Enjoy your freedom. And another one that had a horrible home life, a lot of drinking, and this boy would, from the time he was 13 years old, he would get drunk, got on drugs. He'd get cleaned up, and he was a nice kid to talk to, but he couldn't stay off of it because that's all he saw when he got home. He's the one I asked him, I said, what do you and your family, do you ever do anything as a family? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? I said, you ever go down to Mohegan? Everybody knows what a Mohegan is. He said, what's Mohegan? He didn't have a clue what it was or where it was at or anything else. When I was a kid, we was down there all the time. We lived 60 miles away. But he ended up in a drug raid one night, shooting his wife and killing her. So he's just life in prison right now. But occasionally there's a good thing. I was at their Dutchman for a seminar of hospice one day, and this girl come up to me and she looked at me and she said, "Are you Jack?" I usually hesitate when anybody asks me. I usually say it depends on who it is and what they want. And anyhow, so I said yes, and she told me her name, and I knew exactly who she was. And I even got off where she lived, which surprised her. She said, "I just want to let you know I got my life straightened out. I'm married and I got 2 kids and everything's going good." So, you kind of give those success stories, you kind of count on one hand. But anyhow, anybody have any questions?
Did the kids get any intervention or therapy, services? I guess I'm trying to say.
We had the counselors. Now the counselors that we had on staff for juvenile court were also school counselors.
Okay.
So they knew these kids before they came in here. So the counselors dealt with them and had some success stories of their own. Yes.
Okay.
How many kids did you have at a time?
How many at a time?
Full?
Well, the cells downstairs were made for one, but before I came, the bed on the bottom was concrete, and then they welded a steel platform up about so high, so they would put 2 in there, so it's an area made for 4, there was 8 in there at times. And the cells upstairs, which was much larger than the ones downstairs, they had 2 beds in there, but there was usually only 1 in there at a time. So anyway, they came back to come upstairs. But, yeah, we were filled up frequently.
When you said upstairs, second floor?
No, that would be on this floor here on the other side. Go across the hallway, and we're going to go downstairs, I guess. And I'll show you some of the rooms over there that we had for office space and where the cells are at. The ones upstairs aren't open right now for viewing. There's nobody in them.
Were there any escapes, Jack?
Oh, you had to ask that.
Of course it is.
We had a couple escape. We had one kid took off one night. There was about 10 inches of fresh snow on Claremont Avenue, and he took off out the back door. And the police started getting calls about some dummy running down Claremont Avenue in the snow in his stocking feet and a sweatshirt. So, yeah, they got him. And I had one take off on me one day, I'll be honest with you. And this was a guy that was 18 years old. He shouldn't even have been here, but the 17, and all the paperwork was when he was a juvenile, so the judge put him in here. And he took off on me and went out across here, and pretty much, I mean, all the police knew him and knew probably where he was going, Westview Trailer Park over on Claremont Avenue. They got over there, he had already been there and left. He was a fast runner. But I said, well, I'm gonna go out and look. So I went back over in the woods out off of Mifflin Avenue. I sat back there in the woods for a little bit, and I heard a twig break, and I looked around the tree, and he was walking right straight towards me. I just reached out and grabbed him. He didn't even know I was there, so I think that was perfect justice.
Was there anything else in the facility here besides just juvenile detention? There wasn't any children's homes?
Yes, the children's home was still here at that time. The whole time that I was here, the children's home was still here. Thorn and Candy Frame were the house parents, and I think before that, family by the last name of Goon, Larry and Mike Goon, and some of that family members, they were the house parents for quite a while for the children's home. And I don't know, it was still open. The detention center was still open when I left, so I don't remember just exactly when it did close, that portion of it, and then later on when. They started working, and this is part of the Department of Youth Services thing, trying to get the kids, keep them out of the facilities, putting them in foster homes, and of course they need foster homes somehow. Funded for foster homes, but it's definitely something that's needed, decent homes for some of these kids to be in, to try and keep them off the streets.
How do you think they would do as a foster child? I mean, would they just give the foster parents a hard time and try to run away?
Some, but some of them did very well. Just luck of the draw, it depends on, a lot of people had, rough times growing up, when, families that they, didn't have much, and, for whatever reason, they couldn't take care of them. My own, not me, my family personal experience. My mother was one of 6 when she was 4 years old. The whole 6 was taken away from them, and because they couldn't take care of them, they had 6 more. So I've got cousins and aunts and uncles all over. I have no idea who where. But anyhow, that's a weird, extreme example. But
Were you permitted to restrain them with cuffs or anything like that?
we did. We took them down to they had a court appearance. We would put them in handcuffs. And we had a belly belt with handcuffs and take them down.
But in-house, or like taking them from one portion of the facility to another, they weren't?
No.
You said they didn't have any privileges. Could they have books and
They
could
could
they
have.
socialize?
They could have books. Yeah, they could talk amongst themselves. Even, the cells are right next door, so if they didn't get real loud, they could talk amongst themselves and have some conversation. And they could have books, magazines, so forth, but, we had to check everything. This is, I forgot about this. This is just some of the things that, we found on them as they were coming in to go to detention. Knives, stars, marijuana pipe, and that's just a small portion of. But so we had to search them really good.
How about drugs?
We didn't find too much in the way of drugs at that period of time.
So did they have like a certain uniform or jumpsuit or something they had to wear that was?
We had sweatpants, gray sweatpants, and gray sweatshirts or t-shirts,
Okay.
and that's what they wore.
Appreciate.
And so, they couldn't wear their own clothes. That was one of the keys. The guy ran up Claremont in the snow, but they had on gray sweatpants.
Why do they close and
Try to find their way back.
And this closed in 2013? Is that for two? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Well,
I'm gonna move away from my wife because she might hit me, but we had 4 teenagers.
oh, blame them.
We had 4 teenagers at home during that period of time, and they would, we got to know every cop in town. But not that they were bad. They were just your usual everyday kids. And,
Like you.
yeah, but I couldn't tell them what I did because they were pulling the crap that I was telling them. So, our one, we would threaten them with, "You're gonna go to the children's home." You know?
Yeah.
And,
I did.
You nurtured that. I still have a letter from my one daughter that just begged that, "Oh, I will be good from now on because I do not want to go to the bad kids' home." So, and they're all fine now, all successful, everything's good. But you had mentioned where they weren't shackled when they went from court and back.
Well, yeah, from here down to the courthouse, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I worked for Delroy over here for 25 years, driving school bus, and my bus, I would pull it up in the afternoon right here around the corner, and by the porch, and the sheriff would bring him in and get him out of the car, and they'd come shuffling, all shackled up, and I'd stand there by my bus and I'd say, "Sure is a nice day to be outside." And it just, it just, why do you do this? It's just something
You
that's.
did stuff too, you just didn't get caught.
So it was good to have this place here. Fortunately, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm certainly older than most of you, except Dave maybe.
Yeah.
But anyhow, when I was young, it was called Boys Industrial School down in Lancaster, Ohio. That was I don't know what was down there, but you didn't want to go there. You know, it was the same thing. You didn't want to go down there because those were all bad places.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't wanna go there.
Where do the workers sleep? The ones that were here overnight watching?
We'll see that downstairs.
Oh, okay.
There's a room down there that we call it the lounge, and had a little refrigerator in there, and place for them to take turns, they could sleep overnight, you know. But somebody had to get up, we had to do hourly checks, had to have the checklist, and had to write down what they were doing, you know, what time you checked on them. And that would be at least once an hour. And those were the problem, sometimes more than that.
Do you ever have any temp suicides or anything like that?
One that comes to my mind right offhand, yeah, but it was not successful.
Yeah.
Got into Mansfield and hospital, and I don't remember whatever happened to that boy.
Were parents ever allowed to visit?
Yes. We had 2 days a week that parents could come and visit. I don't remember what days, but they could visit for a half hour. Good questions.
Yeah. Did you say it was a detention home at the same time that it was a children's home, or were they different times?
No, the same time period, but it was totally separate. I mean, the doors that you go through to going over to that side now, they were sealed off. So, you know, the kids that's over here couldn't get over there, and nobody over there could get over here.
Oh, okay. I didn't think you'd want them together.
No, there was no interaction at all, no.
Okay. My girlfriend's dad grew up in here until he was adopted, and then, his brother was adopted too, but his brother was so unruly that want him back, so they just kept the one brother.
Hmm.
He grew up great, you know,
Yeah.
but, yeah, they lived here. I guess their parents were gone, you know, so.
Anything else?
You're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're up.
My name's Melissa Meeker, and I was the teacher here starting in 1999. I actually remember the exact date I started. It was May 20th of 1999. And I only remember that because it was my dad's 50th birthday, and I chose that that was his gift. Hey Dad, I graduated from college, I got a job, happy birthday. I think I got him something for real, I don't remember. I grew up in Stark County, and I came to Ashland University for college in 1995. And I remember April of 1999 rolling around and thinking to myself, I graduate in a month, and I have no job and no place to live. I need to get this resolved soon. So I had my resume on file at the Freer Detention Center at AU, so if schools were looking, they can contact colleges, and the colleges would give resumes of people who wanted that on file. And then in the meantime, I was looking for a summer job, because I figured I wouldn't start teaching until August, like a regular teacher. The way I understand it, the detention center closed maybe in like 97 or so, and then it reopened for a while.
Apparently so, yeah, I didn't know it reopened.
I think it reopened in 1998. I wasn't here yet. There was a woman here who was the teacher, and she was an AU graduate as well. And she had put in her notice, her husband had gotten a job, and they were moving like to the Cleveland area, so she was gonna leave. And I'm thinking maybe she told the director, who had only been here for about 3 months at that time, to contact AU, check with the Career Development Center, and maybe he could get some resumes of people who might interview. I kind of think I'm the only one who returned his phone call. So I remember getting that phone call in my dorm room in April, and I'm like, a detention center, what is this? Like, I am not gonna teach there, that is, like, that's nuts. And I'm like, well, I do need a job. I remember being taught that you never go on an interview for practice. You always practice before the interview. But I thought, I can go on this interview for practice, because it's not like I'm gonna take this job. So I went ahead and scheduled the interview. And I use the term interview loosely. It was mostly this guy who was still relatively new. He'd only been here 3 months, pretty much just pleading with me to please come work for at least the summer. If I could work for at least the summer to tide him over. He understood if I wanted to leave when the school year started, but please, please for the summer. And I thought to myself, like, I really didn't see that in my future or anything. But it is a teaching job, it's in the education field, it might look really good on a resume to a future employer, it would be a unique experience. So I decided to be a little crazy and accept the position. I know my parents and my fiance at the time, my husband now, I know we were all a little worried, like what did she sign up for, what is she doing? Because you think detention center, this is basically the equivalent of jail for kids. Jack mentioned the Ohio Department of Youth Services, that's like the equivalent of prison for kids. But you think, you know, jail, unruly, delinquent kids, you're gonna have all these problems. In 14 years, I didn't have anyone come close to assaulting me. I didn't have a kid ever lay a hand on me. That was never an issue here. We came to realize that I was actually safer working here than in a regular public school. Besides their first day in here, every day I knew where they were. I knew where they spent the night. I knew they had the opportunity for 8 hours of sleep. I teach at the Career Center in Ashland now. I just moved up the road and switched centers when this place closed. And I don't know that about my students every night. I think most of them did have that opportunity and they weren't home, but I don't know that for sure. Here, I knew that for sure. And I knew what they were bringing with them. Nothing. They didn't have anything to bring to school with them. So a lot of my concerns about safety that I had and that my parents and my husband had, they ended up being unfounded, which is good. I'm very glad about that. My official title was teacher. I had to have a teaching license to do this job. I was set up with the state teacher's retirement system. But really, I worked more as a tutor here. This was a lot like a one-room schoolhouse. It was a 10-bed facility. So Jack mentioned the 4 cells downstairs. Those top bunks you talked about, I don't recall ever seeing those. I think they took those out. So we had 4 single cells downstairs and then 3 cells upstairs that could hold 2 people. And we did use those. We would put 2 people in those cells. Never a boy and a girl together. You could have 2 girls in a cell together or 2 boys, but you would never have a mix. So we could have 10 kids at the most, and they could be any age. I think the youngest I ever had was a 9-year-old one time. But most of the time, they're like middle school, high school kids. But when you have a 12-year-old 7th grader and a 17-year-old senior in high school, that's a pretty wide range in school. It's not like you can have a traditional classroom where you're teaching. So I really worked one-on-one with kids, kind of in that one-room schoolhouse type environment. Like, you know, what things do you struggle with? What sort of, you know, work can we get you or whatever? When they were in here, they were to have 3 hours of school a day. I think that was set by DYS. They had to have like 3 hours of education a day. So I know in the morning they would eat breakfast, and that was before I got here. I got here about 8. They would eat breakfast. They would have to clean their cells while they were supervised by one of the detention officers. And then they would come down for school at about 8:30. They'd be there for like an hour and a half. They'd go back to their cells for a break, and then they'd come back down again for another hour and a half. And so when school was in session, like when I started, there were about 2 weeks left in the school year. So my job was to always contact the school and let them know when one of their students came in. If you've been involved in schools at all, that attendance record keeping is really critical for schools. They need to know where their kids are. So if someone came in, I was on the phone with the school right away to let them know. When that student got released, I'd call the school to let them know. And then I usually stayed in touch with them every week. I would call every week and say, is so-and-so still here? Can I get this week's assignments for him or her? And then I would get those assignments and give them to the kids and help them with whatever they needed help with. Sometimes it was just looking over their shoulder saying, you need anything? You look like you got the hang of this. Yeah, I'm good. Or let's sit down and try these math problems together because I don't think you know what's going on here. And they're like, no, I have no idea what I'm doing. So it was very much just like one-on-one kind of tutoring. We were open during the summer. We were open during Christmas breaks and things like that. I had no snow days. There was no trouble with the kids getting here. They were already here. It doesn't matter if there's 10 feet of snow outside. They were here. So I have to be here. So when they didn't have work from their school, I had to provide work for them. And I was given virtually no guidance on that. It was just give them something educational to do. Like it could be anything. And it was very hard to gauge because they're in school, they're in all these different grades. I'm not sure what they've already learned. Like even if I look up the standards, like the 7th grade science standards that they're supposed to learn, if it's March, I don't know what they've already covered from those standards or not. So I started with like 2 weeks left in the school year, and then it was summer. And it was very much fly by the seat of my pants, make it up as I go, do the best I can to get by and create work for them. It got easier over time because I built a stockpile of all sorts of different assignments for a wide range of grade levels and things that I could give to people. But that first summer, it was, I'm here from 8 to 4, and then I'm going home and I'm working and trying to put stuff together. We had a daily population sheet that would tell you all the kids who were here, the date they came in, their birthday and age, the charge they had, how long they were supposed to stay. And so you would see that and you would look and there'd be a kid that says he's supposed to be here 90 days. So I'm thinking in my head and planning all these things, you know, what sort of work can I get for him? What type of activity should I be looking for? And then he gets out 15 days later. Like, that was never a guarantee of what was gonna happen, you know? So it was very much just constantly changing. Kids are coming in and out all the time. Some people might be in here for the 90 days it says they're supposed to be. Some are runaways who come in and they're here for 3 days till someone from North Carolina can come pick them up or whatever. And I'm always making plans and then like they're gone before I expect them to be, or they're staying way longer than I expected them to be. I had to learn to adapt very quickly and just go with the flow, which I did. I did that quite a lot. first started, I was still only 21. My birthday is not until July. And that summer, for some reason, there was a boy in here who was 19. Kids can be on juvenile probation until they're 21. And so I think serving time in DH was like one of the last things on his checklist to get off probation. And so he was in here, and I remember seeing that on that population sheet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm only 2 years older than this kid. I was so freaked out. It was like my first, like my first day, and I'm like, is this kid gonna have any respect for my authority that like I just got? I don't even have respect for my authority yet. I don't know what I'm doing. How, like, what's gonna happen here? He was a really nice kid. We had no issues at all. He was very polite and respectful and everything. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. We had a 16-year-old boy in here at that time when I first started who was a frequent flyer. I smile because that's the same term that we use too. And he definitely intimidated me. I never had any issues, but he definitely had that vibe that, you know, he might just do something at any time. And I mean, even there, I was only 5 years older than he was at the time. So it was a little intimidating at first. Over time, I got older, so that made it easier. And I got used to the environment, and I was able to handle it a little bit better. My approach with kids was to just be calm and friendly, keep things low-key. I am 5'4", I am clearly not a bodybuilder, so getting in their face and trying to like scream and intimidate them or something like that, I didn't think was going to be very effective. That was just going to be laughable. So when they would come in, you know, I would just talk to them. Hi, I'm Mrs. Meeker, I'm the teacher here. I have some rules to go over with you. You know, if you need any help with anything, let me know. And then I would help them with whatever work I could. I never talked to them about what they were in for. We were in school, so that wasn't what my role was. I was supposed to be educating them. I wasn't a certified counselor, so I wasn't going to try to be for them. And I didn't want to get subpoenaed to court either if they told me too much information or something like that. I wanted to be out of that. The approach I found was, first of all, a lot of them, even though you would think juvenile delinquents don't want to come to school, they don't like school, and most of them don't. When they're in here, they do. Because you can only sit in that cell and count the bricks so many times. It gets pretty tiring in there. So even if you don't like school, coming to school in DH means you're out of your cell, and that's a win. So usually they were pretty happy to come down there. I mean, they might not be happy once they got their work, but they were happy to be out. And they were usually pretty cooperative. We had a rating system for behavior of checks, pluses, and minuses for good, excellent, and poor behavior. And they had so few privileges in here. So if you had a minus for the day because of poor behavior, you lost what few privileges you did have. And most kids did not want to lose those privileges. They would have free time, so they would be out in our multi-purpose room, which was my classroom, except when they had free time, I was gone for the day, so it was their free time room. They couldn't play cards like a regular deck of cards, but they had like Uno and Skip-Bo and Phase 10 and board games and things like that. I think they could color and draw and things, and they were able to talk to each other during that time as well. It was all supervised, of course. But having that free time was also a big deal, because if you misbehave, then you're stuck in your cell again, counting the bricks for the 800th time. The number doesn't change, it's very boring. So they wanted to make sure that they had those privileges. When I would interview at other schools for teaching jobs, I was always afraid that they were going to think I was this great disciplinarian. Like I taught at a detention center, I must be this really tough lady or something. And not so much, because I didn't really have to be. Like they were generally, most of the time, willing to come to school because it was out of their cell. They were most of the time cooperative because they wanted to be out of their cell in the evening and make sure that they didn't get their privileges taken away. So I didn't have to deal with a whole lot of like horrible discipline problems. I would find with students if they, like the big issue is just they wouldn't want to work and they would just sit there and not do anything. But it wasn't like they were, you know, dragging other kids down and beating them up or throwing tables at me or anything like that. It was just sitting there. And I would find that if I went over and talked to them and I gave them their work, And if it was during the school year and it was work from their home school, I might say, I've got some history and math and science for you that I picked up today. I don't care which one you work on, as long as you're working. Let me know if you need any help with anything. And I would just walk away, and I would give it usually took no more than 10 minutes. And you could kind of see it. I'd be walking around the room, and I'd be keeping an eye on them, and you just see them sigh, and get a book out, whatever subject they pick, and open it up and get to work. So I found just kind of being clear in what I expected, and then giving them a little bit of space, they would usually cooperate. I didn't have to have too many pull-out discussions, hard nose on the rules with them or things like that. I was supposed to always have a detention officer in the room with me when I was teaching, which is another one of the reasons that this was safer than a regular school. I mean, I have a school resource officer where I am now, but there's 40 classrooms and one school resource officer, so he's not able to bilocate yet. So that was reassuring when I first started, to just know there was a guard there, someone keeping an eye out for me and everything. The longer I was there, the longer some of those detention officers were there, they would tend to leave me alone sometimes. They would go out of the room. We might have a new student come in during the school hours that they would have to take care of. They might have to do paperwork, or they're handling phone calls. And the first few times that happened, I was like, where did they go? Why are they not here? But there was never an issue. And we were a small building. It echoes down there. I'm pretty sure if I screamed, they would have come running pretty quickly. But thankfully, I never had to do that, and I never had to worry about that. When I was reminiscing about my time here and thinking about what things were like, someone asked about uniforms. We had brown t-shirts that said Ashland County Juvenile Detention Center on the back. They had brown pants, white socks, and then they had orange sandals, or slides is I know the term they use today. We didn't want them to have good running shoes, so that if they did get away, it was not going to be easy for them to run in those. You're going to kick those off probably if you're running. And running in your bare feet isn't comfortable, like I'm sure the kid in 10 feet of snow figured out pretty quickly. So they wore those. When they walked through the facility, they had to cross their arms over their chest like this. If we were moving multiple kids or all the kids all at once, they would have to line up from shortest to tallest. There would be a detention officer in the front of the line and one in the back of the line. And they would have to count through every doorway that they walked through. And there were like 3 or 4 doorways, and you could hear them. Sometimes the people in the front would start counting before the people in the back were done counting. But they'd have to go through and count, and the person in line last would have to say last count. So they'd be walking through the door, 10, last count, and that way we could kind of keep track of them as they were going through the building. And same for Jack, whenever they went to court or anything, they were cuffed, they had the belly belt to cuff their hands up there. Sometimes their ankles were shackled too, so it was really hard to walk and shuffle along. Sometimes I never had to deal with restraining kids because I was the teacher. I know some of the officers had to deal with that sometimes. You would have some kids who were pretty belligerent. Usually it was our frequent flyers. They were frequent flyers for a reason. They would keep coming back. So sometimes they would be shackled and they would be in their cell and they'd start hitting their head against the cell. So we had a helmet that we put on them. We nicknamed it the happy helmet. So if they were like being really violent or whatever, they'd be in there with that helmet. So when they're hitting their head against the cell, it's not doing as much damage because they've got the helmet on. I can only remember maybe like 5 kids that they put the happy helmet on in 14 years. It was not something that we used very often, but it was one of those resources we had to keep them safe from themselves, when they were in that kind of violent mode. In my classroom, one of the things I had to do, they would get golf pencils to use because a regular pencil had a greater potential to be a weapon. So they would have a golf pencil like this, and then we would take one of these old erasers and cut them in half, and we had to number all of them with their cell numbers. So I would get a Sharpie and write on these. So we had cells 1 through 4, and then the double cells were like 5A, 5B, And I would have to get a piece of paper and write their cell number on here and tape it to the top of it. And every time they left the classroom, I'd have to collect the pencils and erasers and make sure they were all accounted for. And then they'd come back and I'd give them back to them. I did that like 4 times a day. And I'd completely forgotten about it. When I was thinking about talking here, I thought of that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore. That was like, it didn't really bother me much when I did it, but now that I haven't done it for 10 years, I'm really glad I don't have to do that anymore. But we had to keep track of all of that stuff. If they had something where they were going to use like colored pencils or crayons or markers, we had to count all of those. Make sure if we gave them a pack of 10 markers, they gave us a pack of 10 markers with the caps on them, back and everything. As far as recreation goes, I know someone asked about reading. The teacher who had been here before me had coordinated with the Ashland Library, so Bookmobile would come out once a month, not for the kids to get on Bookmobile. They would come by with bags of books. They would get 2 bags with 60 books total, and they bring Bookmobile, I think out to Darrell-Roy, they might bring it out there, that was one of the stops. And then one of the library workers would come over with those giant bags for us. And so the kids could have those books to read for like a month, and then we would rotate. When I was here, after a few months, I started putting in requests. Like I contacted the library, like if a student wants a certain book, can I ask for that book? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. So I would go through about a week before Bookmobile was coming. I always knew when they were coming, we had a schedule. And I would ask them what sort of things they wanted. And I would take down those book requests and call the library, and they couldn't always get those books, but a lot of times they would get the books that the kids wanted. They weren't allowed to take those books to themselves and read them in there, so if you got tired of counting the bricks, you could read the books as well. And a lot of kids were eager to read. Like when the library came and brought new books, it was exciting because it was something new. We didn't have a lot of new things here. There was never a lot of new things in this building. This building was old, nothing was new. So it was exciting for them to have that opportunity to get different books to read and everything. So I know, like you said, you see a lot of people who, you see them later on and they didn't change much, and some of them do. I learned that everybody messes up. I mean, we were all teenagers. We all screwed up when we were teenagers. Some people just screw up worse than others. Some screw up in front of the cops, unfortunately, and some don't, it just kind of depends. But there are a lot of kids who came through here who I never saw again. They were one and done, in and out, or maybe just a couple times. But then you have those ones who are in all the time. And then you read about them in the paper, and then they're in jail or prison or something, Some people never learn, some people do. We had a lot of people who were in here who I think did learn from it. It definitely, you didn't want to go to that bad home or anything like that, Some kids, we were like their second home. This was a more stable place for them, They were getting 3 meals a day, they had a place to sleep, they knew they were going to see the same people all the time, so. Did you have people stay overnight here and sleep here? So ours was not like that. We always had to have at least 1 male and 1 female officer on duty at all times. And during the day, we'd have a little bit more than that. But we had shifts, like 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 to 10, and then 10 to 6. And if you were working the night shift, you were here to work the night shift, not to sleep. So, you had to do cell checks. I think they had to do them maybe every half hour on the night shift. If they were on suicide watch, you had to do it much more frequently than that. I don't know of any suicides or attempted suicides from when I was in here. I would think I would have heard about that if that happened, but I don't recall that ever happening. But I do remember, kids would be on watch for that, and they would have to, the detention officers would have to check their cells much more frequently than the other kids. We had visitation, I believe it was every Wednesday night and Saturday morning. So when a kid came in, parents would have to come in to fill out paperwork, and they could have a list of people who were allowed to visit them, family members. It could include clergy, counselors, lawyers, different things like that. And I think maybe they could have 2 visitors on each visitation day. So if you were on the approved list, you could visit, or you could call, or they could call you. I think they call you, but the detention officer had to dial the number and be right there for the phone call and everything. So they did have that opportunity for visiting. And I know when they closed this place and they made that move to where the kids were in Erie County, that was one of the concerns that a lot of our staff had here. Like, how are those kids gonna get visits? Like, that's gonna be really hard for them. And like, you know, they're teenagers, like, you know, they need some connection to people that they're comfortable with, you know, that's gonna be, I don't know how it's working out, but I know we were concerned that that would be pretty challenging, so that's a lot of my rambling off the top of my head. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
So you stayed here the whole time until they closed it?
Yeah, that summer job that I was gonna do just for the summer to help that guy out lasted 14 years. Definitely not my intention, but it worked out okay.
I was a special ed teacher in the city schools at Ashland High School, and
Okay.
I'm just so glad to see a face. I was in contact with you all the time, but I never actually got to see you. But I just wanted to say, I mean, that was challenging working not only with kids with emotional issues, but with you know, disabilities as well. And you did a remarkable job, and the material that came back was always so good, and they really, really did well. And I just wanted you to know that. It was very much appreciated.
I did always try to work with them, to help them out, and to make sure the work was decent quality. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if your teacher gave you 25 math problems and you're done in 3 minutes, no, not happening. We're gonna take a look at that and fix that. I do remember one time I had like 3 boys in here who were all in an Algebra 1 class at Ashland High School, and they had this assignment. They had to solve inequalities and graph them. Those are problems that have a lot of steps, and they were completely lost. And so I gathered the 3 of them, we sat around the table together, and I did like the first 2 problems for them, had them write it down, and then we just walked through them. I'm like, all right, number 3, what do we do? You know, what's the first step? And we just kept going through, and, you know, eventually I didn't have to ask so many questions about what's the next step. You know, they were getting the hang of it. And the one boy, who was a frequent flyer and pretty ornery, to be kind, a lot of times, he was like, well, after you do 20 of these, they're not so hard. Well, yeah, you know, if you learn it and you practice it and you persevere, you'll do okay. Like, maybe try that with some other things in your life, you know, just so, but I enjoyed being able to just like sit and work with them, like in that small group or individually, and help them out a lot. And I know there were sometimes when I would call a school and I'd say so-and-so's here, they'd be like, oh good, maybe they'll end up with some credits this year. Because like they weren't going to school, you know, they weren't getting work done, and then they come here and it's like, well, you're gonna get some work done because you got nothing else to do. Like, you know, you can't run away, you can't not go to school. Like, you're gonna be here and you're gonna get stuff done, so. Any other questions? I teach at the Career Center, up the road, so I just moved 5 miles up the road. It was actually kind of weird. I worked today and then I went home for dinner and I came back here, and it was like my car wanted to turn on George Road where I normally turn to go to the Career Center. And I'm like, no, I'm not going there. Like, I'm going to an old workplace this time. So kind of had to remind myself of that as I was driving.
Have you been downstairs since you retired? Will tonight be like deja vu?
No, I came for the Open Doors event in September. That's how I got to here. Because I came to that in September, and so now here I am.
Don't know if you can answer this as well as Jack. There is a home out on Old 30, just west of Hayesville. It was for boys. Peter Patterson ran it.
Exactly.
What was the difference from there to being here?
That was a private run. That was I don't remember the name of the organization. It had the big horse out front.
Yeah.
And then a motel at one time. That was a private run facility, run
tuition?
I don't know how they got there, I don't know,
Okay.
but I didn't know Peter did.
Okay. So,
I was gonna say, I thought it was interesting, I'm sorry, to hear you got meals from restaurants.
Mhm.
We got meals from Dale Roy or the sheriff's department whenever Dale Roy was closed. I was like, I liked a meal from a restaurant. Like, I had my lunch, I didn't eat that,
there was that truck
but,
stop.
yeah, I was like, you went to the truck stop, like, I could get some food from the truck stop, but nope, we just got them, we didn't have a detention officer go over and get them from Dale Roy, or we had a county car, so on the weekends or holidays, they would go down to the sheriff's department and get the meals and everything, so.
Were
Their
there,
ear sounded better.
was there ever a day when you had nobody here?
No. That was the dream, but no. And there was a time, there was a spell, where we had like 14 or 15 kids in here. Like, they would just kept bringing kids in, and we're like, are you gonna let anyone out? Cause like, we only have so many beds. Like, we would have to put like 3 kids in one of the upstairs cells with like a cot. Like, we had the different mattresses, like the mattresses that went on the cement pad that was the bed. So we would just put that on the floor for the extra kids, and that was a crazy time, like that. I'm making new pencils for everybody, you know, and like, they're coming in and out, and I'm trying to keep track of everything, and so. We also always hated Fair Week here. For some reason, kids who were on probation thought it would be a good idea to go to the fair, where everybody is, and smoke weed, when their probation officer is walking around or something, you know, and then they get a probation violation on them, and they'd end up in here. So usually like that week right after the fair, we get pretty busy. A lot of people